Big news! Some of you remember that just a couple days ago, one of the admins on Total War's Twitter page dropped this little gem. And before I continue, thank you to the half a dozen people on my Discord page that pointed this little thing out, because not even a day later, Total War removed it from their Twitter page. Regardless, the damage was done, and even though it's only been a couple of days, people have been theorizing left and right what this could be about. The next game being the Crusades, Agincourt, 100 Years' War. Personally, I think all of those people don't want to be disappointed. So they've lowered their expectations for what this really is. I think we all can imagine what this means. Let's look closely at this image. 3 swords, 1 full helm, and the same full helm used on Medieval 2's cover art for their Kingdoms expansion. Yes, do you know what this means? Medieval 3 is finally in the works! But, just in case you think this is all speculation, let me share this little tidbit. One subscriber of mine, Agrariatis, also my first Patreon, thank you so much, you great gardener king, got to tour one of Creative Assembly's studios back in February during their tour of each of the studios week. Now, one of his close friends happens to be a developer there and gave away a great number of spoilers they have planned. Due to that little tidbit, I'm also not saying their names for obvious reasons. Moving on. First and foremost, the team that this guy works on is one that's in charge of creating all the units, the unit models that is, for the different factions. Anyway, these are all the factions that he's confirmed they're working on. He doesn't know which of the factions are going to be playable upon release, but he stated that at least 10 of these are going to be playable. Now, just because there are only 10, that does not mean that the rest are going to be released in DLC bundles later on. He said that they're trying to move away from that. Instead, the other factions are going to be unlockable after you play the game. Similar to how in Medieval 2, where you had to play one campaign from start to finish in order to unlock the other factions, Medieval 2 is going to have that same basic concept. However, there are some things that you need to do apart from just playing the campaign. Like apparently they're going to say, you need to conquer this faction at a certain time, or you need to survive until this event. Things like that in order to unlock the rest of the factions. I love that idea. He said that there are going to be DLCs, but they're going to be more like the expansion packs you had back in the day, or like the Charlemagne expansion from Attila. Now, speaking of story, I'm not sure which time period this all takes place either, because we've got a few nations that existed at different times, all on the same map. Frankly, I'm not even annoyed either. I think this will be fun. Now let's get to the meat of it. We know so far that there's going to be a few things that are returning from Medieval 2, and a few things that are going to be new, starting with the returning features. Number 1, family trees are making a comeback. In Medieval 2, you had a faction leader, a faction heir, and a number of sons and daughters. These characters age in-game, they can get married, have kids of their own, and even die from old age. Meaning after a certain number of turns, it just says, hey, this character died, here's how old they were, here's the cause. The male characters could lead armies, while the female characters acted as diplomats. This concept has been modified and refined in many ways throughout other Total War titles, but the original outline is making a return. That of a chivalry versus dread rating, a loyalty rating, and I imagine a few other traits that they'll add as well, but so far, he just said some of the old traits are returning, and characters will have skills that can be increased and decreased, like in later titles, and traits that can be acquired through certain actions. They're also adding a way to get rid of, or at least lessen the effects of, certain traits that theoretically aren't very permanent. And we've seen this in later titles like Warhammer, where you could get rid of a trait you didn't want. Another thing is that certain family members can actually be the equivalent of hero units, a unit that doesn't lead armies, but instead acts as a companion. Apparently when they come of age, you can either have them lead an army, or you can have them act as a hero unit. Secondly, the Medieval 2 agents, specifically the spy, the assassin, the princess, and the various religious leaders, are all making a comeback as well. And possibly the merchant diplomat, if the mechanics I'm going to mention later on get the green light. Spies and assassins will also be invisible to other factions unless they fail in action, unlike in recent titles where they're always visible on the map. And just like in recent titles, you'll still be able to look at another faction's army and city contents by getting close enough to them, unlike in earlier titles where you need the spy to accomplish this. So the spy isn't going to have the same effect they had in the previous game. There's going to be an intrigue and espionage mechanic in which spies play an important role. I'll get to this in a second. Lastly, armies without generals are finally making a comeback. Finally! If you're new to Total War and are unfamiliar with older titles, let me explain. In newer Total War games, you have to first hire a leader or a general type of unit, and then hire soldiers afterwards. These soldiers cannot leave the general's army unless you transfer them directly from one army to the other. In older titles, these individual soldiers could leave their general and act as their own army, either in groups or individually. and then later on join another army if you so desire. This is finally making a return. No more having to bring two armies together to finally give them some units. Now, moving on to the new stuff. There's two mechanics I want to cover. One is called feudal rewards. This is a fairly simple one. It allows you to reward regions to individual nobles within your realm. Similar to what they had done in Thrones of Britannia, except these are actual regions you're gifting rather than imaginary estates that offer mild bonuses to the owner. Which leads me to the next mechanic, the intrigue and espionage. This mechanic is a bit more complex. The long and short of it, you're not the only one with a family tree. There are a handful of other powerful noble houses that also have their family trees. When you hire a general, you don't just hire a generic general. You hire a general from one of these family trees. Winning battles in their name wins glory both for you and for their individual family. The nobles will compete with each other as well, so make sure that you balance the power out. Personally, I imagine there's also going to be dilemmas every now and then, wherein you have to choose sides between one of these families if they feud with each other. Perhaps if there's open rebellion, you may have to choose to intervene and prevent it, choose a side and fight for them, or just let them fight it out. That's the first part of this mechanic. The second part is that, as previously stated, all the land you own is given to each of these noble families. Mind you, these are not separate factions. You still own all the land, but I imagine there'd be a separate window that shows you what land is divided up amongst each of your nobles. Another thing is certain nobles will claim ancestry to certain lands. I don't know what this means, they didn't say anything, but I imagine there will be dilemmas wherein a noble petitions to have a region, and you can either give them the region that they request, gain their loyalty and any other rewards, or deny them and suffer the consequences. These noble families are less like the families in previous Total War games where they're to counterbalance your power, and they're more like the vampiric families from Warhammer, and the more you work with one family, the greater the bonuses in that field will be. We'll be on the lookout for more. Lastly, this also adds a diplomacy overhaul to the game. But it's essentially an expansion to diplomacy, which doesn't surprise me considering how much of an overhaul they went into Three Kingdoms. This mechanic allows you to negotiate with individual characters, instead of opening up a diplomacy menu and negotiating with the leader, and thereby negotiating with the entire faction. What this allows you to do is form secret alliances, or bribing or even blackmailing a leader of your choosing. I'm guessing the spy has a part to play in this mechanic. Or gaining their loyalty secretly and having them do things against their own faction. Maybe even eventually getting them to join your faction. And as I said previously, if that leader happens to own any regions, they take those regions with them when they join your faction. Ladies of nobility can also be granted regions. If they marry a member of the faction leader's family, all their holdings will go to that faction. Now they are still working on this mechanic apparently because the test plays have resulted in some disgusting border gore. I'm talking the King of England's son marrying an Egyptian princess and suddenly having holdings in Egypt, which the AI can't even afford to garrison, and that same King of England's daughter marrying the heir of Kievan Rus and suddenly losing half of England to the Russians. You get it. They're probably going to assign characteristics to each faction that restricts them from interacting with anybody other than their neighbors, and lords are probably just going to have access to, say, regions that are within proximity of each other, within reason. Just so you don't get this massive border gore with tons of different factions owning places all over the world. Now, to end this video, I just want to say, on top of all this, there are a handful of unique units and mechanics they have planned for specific factions. Again, we're not sure which ones will be playable upon release, but for example, Wales will of course have access to Welsh Longbowmen, Red Dragons, Leek Militia, and something called Sheep Shaggers. What the? The Holy Roman Empire will have access to the Summon the Elector Counts ability, which allows them to call upon none other than Karl Franz himself, but this mechanic is only available if the White Walkers take over Norway and Sweden. England has the option to exit out of any game in the European theater whenever they want, so long as they come to a vote. France is going to have an automatic -50 penalty to public order until they finally crown Emperor Napoleon Dynamite. Building the Palace of Vlad the Impaler will unlock vampiric corruption, which also spreads fear when fighting the Turks. The Byzantine Empire can break off into several different smaller states, including the Kingdom of Greece, and borrow everyone's money. They're not sure why the AI does this. And if you manage to survive until turn 582, there will be a global invasion from the Mongolian Timurid undead chaos warriors from Mordor, chanting ads for Raid Shadow Legends. God help us all. So be on the lookout for more information on this update, as well as Let's Plays on this channel, info videos, and epic battles. And special thanks to KMGenius for this awesome cover art. Link to his Instagram in the description. Go check him out. And subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Like this video, join the Discord, and donate to my Pantheon of epic subscribers. Thank you for watching. This is the Icy Breeze, and that was a massive troll. Bye!